Hey guys, welcome back to part 2 of the 4-part Jeffery MacDonald murder case series. This case went on for decades. I'm obsessed with it. If you have not listened to part 1, you've got to listen to part 1. That's why it's 1, and then we're in 2, and then we'll go 3 and 4. So I left off on the Article 23 hearing that was coming up for Jeffery MacDonald, but actually I want to give you a little bit of a backstory on Jeff and Colette. And then I'll tell you about the Article 23 hearing. So Jeff and Colette were more than just husband and wife, in my opinion. They had been lifelong friends. They actually met and dated briefly in the 8th grade. They split up for a while during high school, and then they rekindled after high school and, went to college together until 1964 when Colette became pregnant with Kimberly. Now, the couple wasn't married yet. I'm sorry, it was 1963 when she became pregnant, I think. So the couple wasn't married yet, and because it's the early 60s, what do they have to do? Come on, guys, you know the answer. They have to get married. So they get married. Colette drops out of college, and at this point, Jeffrey was attending Princeton for his medical undergraduate degree, and then he was going to apply for medical school, which he does apply for medical school. He gets in, great, good for him, right? They have little Kristen, and little baby Kristen is born in 1967. In 1969, Jeff completes his medical internship and he is inaugurated into the United States Army. They get their orders that they're going to go to Fort Bragg for at least the next 2 years. So a lot of things are coming together. Like they have 2 beautiful children. Jeff finally got his career started. They're moving to North Carolina. Like it's all coming twofold. Colette's able to start college again. Very exciting news. Then in the Christmas of 1969, Colette writes home to her family and loved ones and lets them all know that her and Jeff are expecting another baby. And this time they're expecting a baby boy. That's got to be really exciting. I had 3 girls and then I had 1 boy, and there was just something really special about having my little boy last. I don't know. It was just special. So she was really excited about it. Everything seemed really good. Everybody always said that Jeff and Colette's relationship seemed to have 0 problems. However, the truth is their relationship did have some problems, but because they were both like so conservative, the likelihood of Colette ever telling anybody that she had problems and what her problems were are like slim to none, which is really sad to me. So Jeff sucked. Jeff was a cheater. He was a cheetah pumpkin eater. And Jeff will say like, no, I only have like 2 one-night stands. But the truth is, Jeff entertained his high school girlfriend. I think her name was like Penny or something like that. He would hook up with his high school girlfriend for years. And at first, Penny didn't know that Jeff was in a relationship with Colette, let alone had gotten married. But even when she found out that Jeff and Colette were married, she kept knocking boots with Jeff because that's what stupid people like her do. Jeff had joined like some type of wrestling team. No offense, but I hate wrestling. Jeff had joined some kind of wrestling team, and he would even go as far as to lie to Colette about having to go like out of the country and stuff just so he could go visit Penny in Manhattan. Yeah, he's that kind of guy. Colette's mom said the closest hint to any trouble between Jeffrey and Colette was one time. It was, I think at the very beginning of the year, Colette had mentioned to her mom that her and the kids would like to come visit them. But Colette's mom was actually in the middle of getting a pool put in her backyard. So there's like, a big hole in the backyard. She didn't think it was very safe. And she told Colette that she thought it would actually be better if they waited until the pool was finished that spring. Obviously, her mom terribly regretted that, seeing how her daughter was murdered brutally a short time later. So let's talk about this Article 23 hearing now that we have like a little bit of a backstory on Colette and Jeffrey. So Article 23 hearings are different than regular court. So for one, there's no spectators whatsoever. One person is permitted into the courtroom as a, quote unquote spectator, I guess. And Jeffrey chose his mother. Another thing about Article 23 hearings is anything that transpires during them, the military is not allowed to comment on. Like, they're not allowed to tell the media what's going on. Cameras are not allowed in there. And this means that the only narrative anybody's getting about any evidence brought up during the trial, any key witnesses, all of that is delivered through Jeffrey and his legal team, right? They're the only people out there spinning the story or giving anybody a narrative of what's happening behind those closed doors. Even Colette's own parents don't know what's transpiring in there. So this means that anybody who's an eyewitness or bears a witness testimony during these trials, they don't get to hear any of the evidence. They don't get to hear each other's testimony. It's all a secret, okay? So with that being said, obviously nobody knows any of the evidence against Jeffrey because he's not telling anybody. He's not going to tell anybody what the blood evidence says, or anything that would go against him. So Colette's parents adamantly believed in Jeffrey's innocence because they'd known him his whole life. They'd known this guy his whole life. And Freddie, which is Colette's technically stepdad, but he raised her as his own, he got on the stand and he said that Jeff was an amazing son-in-law. There was no way he could have done this. And if given the chance and he had another daughter, he would choose Jeffery MacDonald as his son-in-law over and over again. So I think Freddie's testimony was pretty impactful. Like, to me, that would speak a lot as a juror. Like, I would be pretty impacted by that. So as convincing as a case the military had against Jeff, the CID, seriously guys, the CID fudged their investigation up so bad that it really hurt. It really hurt the Army's case against Jeff. I'm going to rattle you off what they effed up on, okay? Okay, so for one, they touched one of the telephones that was dangling off of the hook. They touched it before processing it for evidence to begin with. So one of the telephones, the evidence off of it really isn't useful anyway, like the fact that there was no fingerprints and blood, because it was broken the chain of custody or whatever, right? So that was not cool. For two, it was the ambulance driver who picked up the flower pot. The flower pot had been on its side. For three, the mother trucking ambulance driver stole Jeffery MacDonald's wallet and one of the military police saw him do it. So, like, unprofessional. A blue fiber that had been found under baby Kristen's nail was missing. They lost it. There was a skin sample from under Colette's nail. They lost that. They lost the skin sample under Colette's nails. Very unprofessional, sloppy. Nobody had collected Jeff's trash, checked his plumbing before it was flushed or anything. So whatever he set on the curb had already been collected, and then as part of the waste management protocol where they were at, it was burned. So they couldn't collect any evidence from his trash. Like I said, his plumbing, all his toilets were flushed, so they lost what could have been valuable evidence to, back up their theory. The bloody footprint found in Kristen's bedroom on the floor, they accidentally destroyed it trying to remove it for evidence. The fingerprint took dozens and dozens of photos of fingerprints, like they dusted, they put the tape over, they took a bunch of photos so they could go back to their lab and compare them. Well, 50 of the damn photos were blurry. And then when the fingerprint expert went back to the MacDonald household to retake them, water and moisture had seeped into the tape and destroyed all of the fingerprints. So they couldn't analyze them anymore. And remember that blood streak on the Esquire magazine? So many of the military police had touched it and looked at it that the only fingerprints that could be lifted off of it at that point all belonged to military and crime scene investigators. Bravo. Oh my gosh. And then, not to mention, there's this lady named Helena, and she's going to F this whole case up over and over and over. I'll tell you about her shortly, but basically, she was a very strong circumstantial lead because she matched the woman that Jeffery MacDonald described as one of the intruders to a T. She walked around with a blonde wig all the time, a floppy hat, tall white boots. I wouldn't be surprised if Jeffery MacDonald saw her frequently, like in the area or something. And she was actually tracked down and had no recollection of what she did that night because she was under the heavy influence of drugs. So she really, guys, she really messes this case up so bad. But we'll get to her later. So from what I understand, Jeffery underwent, I need to clean my brushes. Jeffery MacDonald underwent like 4 psychological evaluations prior to his Article 23 hearing. And they basically just ruled Jeffery MacDonald wasn't likely to have psychopathic tendencies and commit a crime like this. So that really strengthened his defense. We have someone fitting the crime. We have someone fitting Jeffery MacDonald's description of the intruder, unable to pin down her whereabouts that night. And then he's also deemed not a likely suspect or not someone who could likely pull off such a heinous crime against his own family. Great. Not to mention there is an endless parade of character witnesses all testifying how wonderful Jeffery is, how there's no way he could do something like this. We're talking friends, family, co-workers, friends of Colette's. Nobody thought Jeffery was capable of this crime that testified on his behalf in the Article 23 hearing. Like, literally nobody that knew the man thought he could do this. So let's talk about that witness. So military officer, what is his name? Kenneth Micah. He said while he was en route to Jeffery MacDonald's house a few blocks away, he saw the woman that matched the description Jeffery MacDonald gave of the female intruder. Her name is Helena. And they were pretty familiar with Helena. They questioned her. And like I said, she had no recollection of what she'd been doing that night because she was under such heavy influence of drugs. So this MP tells the prosecutor, listen, I've got to get it off my chest that I did see somebody matching the woman Jeffery MacDonald described as to being one of the intruders on a street corner around the time I was en route to his home. And the prosecutor in the Article 23 hearing was like, just don't tell anybody. Like, that doesn't strengthen our case. Just don't tell anybody. And he's like, okay, I won't. Well, after he testifies for the prosecutor, he actually does turn around and tell the defense, Jeffery MacDonald's legal team, hey, I did see somebody that night that matched a description for one of the assailants in this crime that Jeffery described. And he gets on and he testifies for Jeffery about seeing this lady named Helena on the street corner. Then, after that stroke of luck, some Joe Schmo guy, some delivery driver who is a neighbor of this Helena woman says, you know what? He tells Jeffery's legal team, I actually did see Helena the night of the murders. She had gotten home at about 4 a.m. A car sped up real quick and whipped into our driveway. She gets out, she runs inside, and there was about 3 dudes in the car. So he testifies on Jeffery's behalf to seeing this Helena woman with 3 men getting dropped off relatively shortly after the crime took place to kind of corroborate some reasonable doubt in Jeffery's guilt. You know what I'm saying? Not to mention this eyewitness, Helena's neighbor, said that on the day of the funerals, Helena wore all black. She put up a funeral wreath and she never wore the hats, the wig, or the boots ever again. When police have to answer for this Helena situation, this is their explanation. Like, look, we know who Helena is. We've known her since she was 16 years old. She's a heavy drug user, okay? She's a police informant, and we really cannot tie anything belonging to her whereabouts or anything from her hair, fingerprints, shoe prints, anything corroborating that Helena was at Jeffrey's home the night of the murders. We have a lot of evidence to point out that Jeffrey's lying. What we don't have is any evidence to corroborate that Helena was at his home that night. I'm telling you, I don't think that she did it. She's just a troubled girl. So that's their explanation, which, I mean, in a court case, when someone's, innocence is on the line, that's not really good enough explanation. I'll give him that. It's not good enough. I would have some reasonable doubt, I think. Jeffrey MacDonald actually takes a stand in his own defense, and he maintains the same story he told the police when he was at the hospital. Okay, exact same version, except for he says that he sustained 2 injuries to his head, even though only 1 was ever reported at the hospital or seen by anybody. And he kind of exaggerates his wounds. Like, he made it seem like he had a few abdominal wounds and a few wounds to his arm, when in reality he had one. He's a liar. He's a liar. He believes the reason he didn't get blood on the telephones when he called is because, being a surgeon, he has a really bad habit of washing his hands. So he must have washed his hands when he went into the bathroom before dialing the phone from his bedroom, and he must have washed his hands in the kitchen before dialing 911 from the kitchen phone. The military ultimately dismisses their case against Jeff for insufficient evidence, and he gets an honorable discharge, and he gets the heck out of Dodge. The military ultimately dismisses their case against Jeffrey due to insufficient evidence. And the first thing Jeffrey does is he goes on a media campaign, y'all. He's taking pictures. He's calling magazines to try and get them to do his story. He even goes on the Dick Cavett late night show. And Dick Cavett said that Jeffrey MacDonald was movie star handsome for the 70s. Like, he had it all. However, he was really turned off by Jeff because he just didn't understand how somebody could talk about these crimes so cool, calm, collected, the way Jeffrey MacDonald did. So he would recant what happened, and he didn't cry. He showed very little emotion, and he even kind of told a few off-the-cuff jokes about, like, the army, and he's just a media ham, y'all. Jeffrey's a media ham. He loves it. So Jeff's media campaign was obviously to paint himself innocent and try to get people to investigate the army and look for those 4 people that actually killed his family. That was his media campaign. I think he just liked the limelight. I think he liked his 15 minutes of fame, but whatever. Now, mind you, nobody but Jeff and Jeff's mother know what transpired in that Article 23 hearing. Nobody in the media knows the evidence against Jeff. Nobody in Colette's family. None of Jeff's coworkers or friends. Nobody really knows the full story. So literally the only story anybody's getting is a story that Jeff is painting for them. Jeff wouldn't even give his own father and mother-in-law a copy of his Article 23 hearing transcript because he didn't think anybody needed to know. So Jeffrey decides it is time for me to move on with my life. I can't let this overshadow me forever. He moves to Manhattan. He starts working for an ER and for another physician part-time. He goes to therapy. He's really trying, and then he decides, you know what? I can't keep dwelling on the past. I need to start a new life. And he moves to California in 1972. Meanwhile, Colette's parents are like, okay, we don't have any closure. We don't really even know what happened to our family. Jeff won't sit down and talk to Colette's parents about that night. He says it's too painful. So Freddie and his wife Mildred, Colette's parents, they just keep pushing Jeff for answers. They ask him for the Article 23 transcript, and he won't give it to him. He just shuts it down. He said it's too painful to talk about with you guys. Those 4 people are still out there, yada, yada, yada. It just kind of tries to put them off. Like, they're just supposed to move on from their only daughter and their 2 grandchildren getting fucking murdered. So the only bits of information Fred and Mildred get are obviously through Jeff's media campaign. How painful is that? Could you imagine having to hear about your children's murder and your grandchildren's murder through damn late night talk shows? Like, this is crazy. So Fred, I love Colette's dad. He goes on a mission. He writes 500 letters, a letter for every senator, and he hand delivers them, asking them to reopen this case, get the FBI involved, investigate the Army and their misconduct of handling this case. Like, they need answers. They need help. And in the meantime, Freddie keeps trying to get this transcript. He writes to the Army. The Army tells him, you can't get this transcript unless Jeff signs off that you can have it. So he just keeps trying. He's just hitting the pavement, running, trying to get his daughter's, murder figured out. In an effort to kind of like appease Freddie, Jeff stops by his house November of 1971, and he tells Freddie, like, look, I want to talk to you. I need to tell you something serious. And he tries to give Freddie this like lame ass story about how him and some Green Beret guys hunted down one of the people that broke into his house and murdered his family, and they beat that man to death. And at first, Colette's parents really, really believed him, but a short time later, he swung by their house again, and it was just him and Mildred, Jeff and his mother-in-law, and she tried to ask him about the guy that he killed, and he said, Jeff was like, he's an idiot. That guy didn't know what he was talking about. And the first thing that struck Mildred was she was like, oh my God, he's talking about him in present tense. Like, he's not talking about this guy in past tense. He's talking about this man that he supposedly murdered in present tense. So they started to really, like, the wheels were starting to spin. They were like, why would he finally find one of the people that can prove his innocence? Why would he not want to seek justice and get his name cleared? Why would he just supposedly murder this guy? So then Freddie and Mildred were like, oh, hell no. We're going to take this motherfucker down. I think that he killed my babies. Well, stroke of luck. December 23rd, Jeff's mother actually dropped off the Article 23 hearing transcript to Colette's parents and said, you can keep these. I think they had 1 week. They got to keep the transcript for 1 week. And she said, and then Jeff has to have them back because he's filing a lawsuit against the Army. So the minute that Fred and Colette's mom, Mildred, get a hold of this Article 23 transcript, they are crying and reading. That's how they spend their first Christmas without their kid and grandchildren, just reading this transcript. So now they finally have all the evidence that was against Jeff. And they can see a lot of inconsistencies in what Jeff was saying and just little things that they know about him. Like, for instance, he said that he enlisted in the Army of his own free will, whereas he told Colette he was drafted. Then that following February, Colette's parents got another surprise. The CID, military investigators, wanted to let them know personally that they were reopening the investigation and that Jeff very much was a suspect. So Freddie calls up Jeff and he's like, great news. The CID is reopening the case on Colette's murder and the girl's murder, and hopefully we'll get some answers. And Jeffrey, you can tell, is like fucking pissed, right? He's like, why are they doing that? So the CID gets Jeffrey to sit and talk to them twice for interviews, and they didn't really get to collect a whole lot of evidence against him or find anything different in his story than before. He's been singing the same old song and dance. And then when they go for a third interview with him, he declines and said that his lawyer said it wasn't in his best interest. So he's lawyered up, right? Oh. The CID, like I said, they relaunched their investigation, and without Jeff talking to them, they're like, you know what? We need to thoroughly follow this Helena lead so that we can significantly rule her out, and she won't be an easy way for Jeffery MacDonald to just say, well, Helena did it. Like, she did it. Here's the thing about Helena. Okay, so Helena was a really, really heavy drug user. And she had no recollection of that night. But Helena had this really cute habit of getting like really impaired. She would get drunk, she would get high, she'd be under the influence of drugs and alcohol, and she would confess that she felt like maybe she might have been a part of the Jeffery MacDonald murders. Like, Doesn't ever say, yes, I was there. This is what happened. I did it. She just says, I think I might have been there. I mean, I can't remember, but I think. So this muddies up everything, right? So the CID is like, okay, we need to go talk to Helena again, and we need to see, are these false confessions? Are these real confessions? What is wrong with you? So they track her down, and she says, listen, I am a broken person. I'm a fucked up person. I have said I did it. I've teeter-tottered back and forth, but I'm telling you right here, right now, I did not actually do it. I'm just fucked up, right? Great. Love that, Helena. This is why you don't do drugs. No doing drugs, people, okay? So the CID are like, you know what? Let's take Helena to dinner, and we're going to collect a hair sample from her, and we're going to keep her glass and use the fingerprints off of it. And we're going to see if we can find any trace of her hair, her DNA, anything in the Jeffery MacDonald home. And I know what you're thinking. Oh, but it's too late. No, it's not too late, honey boo boo, because throughout this whole entire ordeal, the Army has preserved the Jeffery MacDonald crime scene. Okay, so the CID collect hair from her, and then they also track down Helena's roommate from 1970, who she was living with during the crimes. And her roommate said, I don't know what that delivery boy neighbor's talking about. Helena did not make it home that day until way into the afternoon. She did not get home at 4 in the morning like he said. So they're like, great. They go and they track down that witness, the eyewitness from the Article 23 hearing, Helena's neighbor, who said he saw her pull into the driveway with 3 men, and then they sped off and she ran into her home. And he admits that he was lying. He admits that he was lying. I don't know why he lied. I don't know why. They don't tell me that, but they say that, yeah, he admitted to lying. So they've pretty much ruled out Helena, and they take a second look at the evidence, and they find even more inconsistencies with what Jeffrey's story was. Like, for instance, the Geneva knife made really jagged cuts. It was not smooth. It was like a rougher knife. And the old hickory knife was straight, and it made really smooth cuts. So they found out that none of the stab wounds for Colette and the children were done with the Geneva knife, even though Jeff claimed that was the knife that he pulled out of Colette's chest, and that was the knife that was not by the dresser floor in their master bedroom. She was not stabbed with that knife. Okay. Another big piece of evidence that they found is when they kind of slightly reassembled the shirt that Jeffery MacDonald had been wearing the night of the murders, they found some blood spots that had been on the shirt prior to it being ripped. So it's like my shirt now, right? If you were to rip this and then put it back together, you could see that this stain was already on the shirt. Okay. So how did Colette's blood get on his shirt before it was ripped? If he was attacked in the living room with his shirt on, you know what I'm saying? And he didn't come into contact with Colette until after he went into the master bedroom. And if it was so messy when the 4 intruders were attacking him on the couch, that blood got on his shirt, why was it nowhere else in the living room? You see what I'm saying? There was also a couple things about Jeff's version of events that didn't make sense. So for instance, if you went to that house after dark and put on only the lights that Jeff said had been on in the apartment, you could not see in the girls' room. There's no way he could have seen Kristen or Kim in their bed, standing over them, looking at them, checking for a pulse. There was no way that he could have seen anything. So that seemed suspicious. Plus, remember in the 2 minutes in between phone call 1 and phone call 2 to 911, Jeff said that he was like going and checking on all his kids, trying to find a pulse, administering CPR. Well, Fred, Colette's dad, and investigators tried to do everything Jeff said he did in those 2 minutes, and you couldn't even do it, even if you were damn running. It was like physically impossible to do all of that in 2 minutes. And then there's the club. So not only did the club have paint matching the MacDonald's home paint, it was also cut from an exact piece of wood used in one of the girls' bed slats. So you know, like on some beds how they have the wooden pieces that go across and then you put the box spring and the mattress or what you have on it. Okay, so one of those wooden pieces to hold on the mattress up was the same exact cut of wood. Cut, right? This is the bed slat, this is the club. There's no way that that club did not belong to the MacDonald home. So, June of 1972, the CID turns over a 3,000-page investigation to the Justice Department. And they're like, listen, you gotta give this a look through. You gotta charge this guy. I'm telling you, he murdered his whole family in cold blood. And the only issue is the Justice Department didn't feel like the case was strong enough to win. And thus, they just couldn't bring themselves to spend the money on the legal costs. Freddie, though, did not stop. He just kept pursuing. He went on a media campaign, took a little page out of Jeff's book. He goes on a huge media campaign. He fights for his daughter's case to get reopened. And guess what? 2 years later, in 1974, they hold a grand jury hearing to see if there's enough evidence to take Jeffery MacDonald to civilian court. So mind you, at this point in Jeffery MacDonald's life, he has moved to California. He's got a job, he's got a car, he's got a girlfriend, he's got his own life. He literally only flies in for his 3 days of testimony during this grand jury hearing. He doesn't stay for the whole thing. He's like, I didn't do it. I don't care. I'm so believable. I'm a suave doctor. So he gives his testimony and then he goes back home. And guess what? I'm sorry, it was 5 days he testified. So anyway, in January of 1975, he was indicted for 3 charges of murder. Yes. Now, they arrest him, and within 1 hour, he's out on a $100,000 bail, though. People actually posted his bail. That's what I'm telling you. When I say people believed him who knew him, they fucking believed him. He was very, very convincing. He gets to fly home to California while he's on bail, and then he just... it's so annoying, but he actually appeals it, and the appeal was that his right to a speedy trial had been infringed on because it took so many years for them to prosecute him. So he almost gets away with not going to trial again. Almost gets away with it. 2 years after that appeal, the grand jury actually reinstates the charges and said, no, I don't care. I don't care that we're charging you. You're going to court. Yeah. So it's been 9 years, 1979, when Jeff MacDonald finally goes to civilian court for the murder of Colette, Kimberly, and Kristen. So this concludes part 2. And in part 3, I will tell you about his trial and his book deal. Okay. Talk to you soon. Bye.